I never believed in creatures from folklore until one of them saved my life. What started as a routine backpacking trip through the Cascade Mountains became something that shattered everything I thought I knew about reality. I'm Jake Morrison, a 34-year-old environmental science teacher from Portland, Oregon, and this is the account of how I got lost in the wilderness, was hunted by a predator, and rescued by something that shouldn't exist. I've spent my entire adult life exploring the outdoors. My parents raised me hiking the trails around Mount Hood, and by the time I graduated college, I had logged hundreds of nights camping in forests across the Pacific Northwest. I completed wilderness survival training, knew how to read topographical maps, could navigate with a compass, and understood proper backcountry protocols. I wasn't some weekend warrior who panicked at the first sign of trouble. I was experienced and confident, maybe too confident, and that's partly why things went so wrong. It was early October when I planned a 5-day solo trek through a remote section of the North Cascades. I spent months preparing, studying topographical maps during my lunch breaks at school, plotting routes with colored markers, calculating daily mileage and elevation gains, identifying water sources and potential campsites. I read trip reports from other hikers who had explored similar areas, taking notes on trail conditions and potential hazards. I checked weather forecasts obsessively for weeks in advance, monitoring multiple forecasting services and comparing their predictions. The extended forecast for early October looked absolutely perfect, promising 4 solid days of clear skies with mild temperatures in the 60s during the day and 40s at night. No precipitation predicted anywhere in the extended outlook. Light winds, basically ideal hiking weather. I packed everything meticulously into my 65-liter backpack, my lightweight tent that I could set up in under 5 minutes, my down sleeping bag rated for 20 degrees Fahrenheit, which was more than adequate for the predicted temperatures, my insulated sleeping pad, a comprehensive first aid kit that I had personally assembled with everything from bandages and antiseptic to prescription antibiotics and an EpiPen. I brought my reliable water purification pump, having learned years ago never to trust water sources in the wilderness, no matter how clear they appeared. I packed 5 days' worth of dehydrated meals, including my favorites like beef stew, chicken curry, and pasta primavera. I brought energy bars, trail mix, instant coffee packets, electrolyte powder, and even some dark chocolate as a morale booster. I included extra batteries for my headlamp and a backup flashlight. I brought waterproof matches and a reliable butane lighter. I packed my small camp stove with 2 fuel canisters. I included extra layers of clothing, a warm fleece jacket, a waterproof rain shell, extra wool socks, and lightweight camp shoes to give my feet relief in the evenings. Most importantly, I packed my satellite emergency communicator, a bright orange device about the size of a deck of cards that could send preset emergency messages, and my GPS coordinates to a monitoring service that would then contact rescue authorities. The device had an annual subscription fee that I paid faithfully, even though I had owned it for 3 years and never actually needed to activate it. I viewed it as essential insurance, the kind of thing you hope you never need, but are incredibly grateful to have when you do. I followed all safety protocols, gave my route details to my friend Marcus, filed a backcountry permit with the Forest Service, and told everyone I would be back by 6 in the evening on day 5. If they didn't hear from me, they should contact rangers immediately. The first day unfolded perfectly. I arrived at the trailhead around 9 in the morning after driving for nearly 3 hours from Portland, my truck one of only 2 vehicles in the gravel parking area on this quiet weekday in early October. The air was crisp and cool, probably in the low 50s, and I could see my breath forming small clouds when I exhaled. The sky was cloudless and brilliant blue, that deep autumn blue you only get in the mountains when the air is completely clear. I took my time gearing up, adjusting my pack straps until the weight distribution felt perfect across my hips and shoulders, double-checking that I had everything I needed easily accessible. I signed the trail register at the trailhead, noting the date, time, and my planned route in the weathered logbook, then started hiking with that familiar excitement and anticipation I always felt at the beginning of an adventure. The established trail wound through magnificent old-growth forest, towering Douglas firs and western hemlocks that must have been hundreds of years old, creating a cathedral-like canopy overhead. The forest floor was carpeted in thick moss that glowed brilliant green where sunlight filtered through. The path was well maintained and clearly marked with blue blazes painted on trees at regular intervals. I made excellent time, my legs feeling strong, covering the first 8 miles by early afternoon. The trail climbed steadily, gaining maybe 1,500 feet through well-graded switchbacks. I stopped for lunch beside a crystal-clear creek that tumbled over smooth stones, the water so transparent I could see individual pebbles on the bottom. I filtered water into my bottles, ate a protein bar and some trail mix, and felt completely at peace. Birds sang in the trees overhead. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in golden shafts. Everything felt right. By late afternoon, I reached my planned campsite, a designated area with a fire ring and established tent sites. 2 other backpackers were already there, a couple from Seattle who were friendly and chatted briefly. Before we settled into our own spaces, I set up my tent efficiently, cooked a dehydrated beef stew dinner on my camp stove, watched the sunset paint the distant mountain peaks with shades of orange and pink and purple, then climbed into my sleeping bag as darkness fell. I fell asleep listening to the wind moving gently through the massive trees, feeling satisfied and content with how perfectly the day had gone. Day 2 started just as well. I broke camp after a breakfast of instant oatmeal and coffee, packed everything carefully, and continued hiking deeper into the wilderness. The morning was beautiful, cool and clear with dewdrops sparkling on spiderwebs stretched between branches. The trail climbed steadily through dense forest, occasionally opening up to provide spectacular views of distant peaks and valleys shrouded in morning mist. Around midday, after climbing for nearly 4 hours, I reached a junction where the main trail intersected with what appeared to be a secondary trail heading in the direction I wanted to go. According to my map, this smaller trail would cut several miles off my route and take me to an alpine lake where I planned to camp for the night. The trail looked legitimate at first glance, the earth worn and packed down with what seemed like recent foot traffic. There were even a few cairns, small stacks of rocks that trail markers often use to indicate routes. I should have been more careful. I should have studied the junction more thoroughly. Pulled out my compass, taken proper bearings, double-checked my map against the terrain features I could see. But I was feeling confident after yesterday's perfect hike. My legs felt strong, I was making great time, and the trail looked obvious enough. So I turned onto it without much hesitation, convinced I was taking a smart shortcut that would save me time and energy. That single decision, made casually in a moment of overconfidence, changed absolutely everything. For the first hour, the trail seemed fine. It climbed steeply through the forest, which made sense given the elevation gain required to reach the alpine lake. But gradually, I started noticing things that should have alarmed me. The trail became less distinct, the worn path narrowing and becoming overgrown. The blazes on the trees that had been so regular and reassuring on the main trail disappeared entirely. I kept telling myself I was just on a less maintained section, that it would improve once I got higher. I kept hiking, pushing through increasingly dense undergrowth, climbing over fallen logs, ducking under low branches. After another hour, I finally admitted I had made a mistake. This wasn't an established trail at all. I had been following a game trail, a path created by deer or elk moving through the forest, and it had led me completely off course. I stopped and pulled out my map and compass, trying to figure out where I was. The problem was that dense forest surrounded me in every direction, no landmarks visible to help me orient myself. I tried to retrace my steps, heading back the way I had come, but in the thick underbrush, I couldn't find the path I had followed. Everything looked the same, endless trees and vegetation. I spent the next 2 hours trying to navigate back to the main trail, consulting my map repeatedly, but I only got more disoriented. The rational part of my brain knew I should stop, set up camp, and wait until morning when I could think more clearly. But panic was starting to creep in, and I kept pushing forward, convinced that I would recognize something familiar if I just kept moving. As afternoon faded into evening, the forest growing darker under thick cloud cover that had moved in, I was stumbling through increasingly rough terrain, climbing over moss-covered boulders, pushing through dense thickets of brush that grabbed at my clothing and pack. My water was running low, and I hadn't seen a stream in hours. I was exhausted, frustrated, and fighting back panic. That's when disaster struck. I was navigating down a steep slope, trying to find easier ground, when I stepped onto what looked like solid earth. But it was actually a thin layer of moss and dead leaves covering loose rocks and air. My foot plunged through. I lost my balance completely, and I fell hard onto the rocky slope below. I felt my right ankle twist violently, bending in a direction it was never meant to go. As my full body weight, plus the 50 pounds of backpack came down on it with crushing force. The pain was immediate and absolutely intense, a white-hot bolt of pure agony shooting up my leg like lightning. I heard myself cry out, the sound echoing through the empty forest. I lay there on the rocky ground for several minutes, maybe longer, gasping for breath and trying not to scream, waves of nausea washing over me. When I finally caught my breath and my vision stopped swimming, I carefully removed my boot and sock with trembling hands. What I saw made my heart sink. My ankle was already swelling badly, the skin turning dark purple and blue, the whole joint grotesquely distorted. Even the lightest touch sent fresh waves of pain through me. I could barely move it at all without wanting to vomit from the intensity of the agony. I knew immediately this was a serious sprain at minimum, quite possibly a fracture or even multiple fractures. Either way, I was in serious trouble. I managed to wrap the ankle with an elastic bandage from my first aid kit and forced my boot back on to provide support and compression. I took ibuprofen and drank water, trying to calm down and think logically. I was miles from the main trail, completely lost, with a badly injured ankle that made walking extremely difficult. The sun was setting. Darkness would arrive within an hour. I needed to set up camp, rest, and reassess in the morning. I found a relatively flat area, sheltered by large boulders, managed to set up my tent despite the pain, and crawled inside my sleeping bag. I ate a cold meal because I didn't have the energy to deal with my camp stove. That night was one of the longest of my life, lying awake in pain and fear, listening to every sound from the forest outside. Morning brought cold reality. My ankle was even more swollen, the bruising had spread halfway up my calf, and putting any weight on it was excruciating. I could hobble short distances using a sturdy branch as a makeshift crutch, but there was no way I could hike the miles needed to get back to the main trail. I needed to call for help. I pulled out my satellite emergency communicator, pressed the SOS button, and waited for the confirmation that my signal had been sent. Nothing happened. I tried again. Still nothing. I checked the device carefully and felt my stomach drop when I noticed a crack in the casing I hadn't seen before. The device must have been damaged when I fell. It was dead, completely non-functional. My emergency backup, my insurance policy, was worthless. I spent that entire day trying to figure out what to do. I attempted to walk, but after 50 painful yards I had to stop and rest. At that rate, it would take me days to cover any significant distance, and I wasn't even sure which direction to go. I had food and water for several more days, but eventually those would run out. My best hope was that when I didn't return on time, Marcus would alert the rangers and they would send search teams. But I was so far off my planned route that finding me would be like looking for a needle in a haystack. Still, I had to try to make myself as findable as possible. I spent hours gathering branches and arranging them into a large SOS signal in a small clearing near my camp, each letter maybe 10 feet tall. I hung bright orange emergency tape from tree branches around the perimeter, creating markers that might be visible from the air. I blew my emergency whistle periodically, 3 short blasts that echoed through the silent forest, the universal distress signal. But no helicopters appeared, no voices called my name, just endless wilderness stretching in every direction. Days blurred together after that. My food supplies dwindled rapidly as I tried to ration carefully, eating half portions to make everything last longer. But my stomach constantly ached with gnawing hunger. My ankle showed no signs of improving, the swelling remaining constant, the pain a throbbing companion to every waking moment. I drank water from a nearby stream I had discovered, laboriously hobbling there twice a day to filter enough to stay hydrated, each trip exhausting me completely. I was becoming weak from limited calories and constant stress, my body consuming itself to survive. The weather, which had been so perfect when I started this trip, began to deteriorate steadily. Clouds rolled in thick and grey, the temperature dropped noticeably, and a cold, persistent rain started falling on what I estimated was day 4, maybe day 5. I huddled in my tent, shivering despite my sleeping bag and every layer of clothing I had brought, feeling hope drain away with each raindrop that pattered against the nylon fabric. It was on the 5th day, maybe the 6th, I had lost track, that everything changed. I had crawled out of my tent in the morning, desperate to find food, thinking maybe I could forage for berries or something edible. I was hobbling through the forest, supporting myself with my stick, when I heard something moving through the brush behind me. I turned and saw a mountain lion, maybe 60 yards away, watching me with intense focus. The big cat was enormous, easily over 100 pounds, tawny fur rippling over powerful muscles. We made eye contact, and I felt primal terror flood through me. I knew enough about wildlife to understand how dangerous this situation was. Mountain lions rarely attack healthy adult humans, but I wasn't healthy. I was injured, weak, and vulnerable, exactly the kind of prey predators target. The lion started moving toward me. Not running, but walking deliberately, closing the distance. I tried to make myself look bigger, raising my arms, but the movement made me lose balance and I nearly fell. The lion kept coming. I shouted, trying to sound aggressive and intimidating, but my voice came out weak and desperate. The lion was maybe 30 yards away now, moving with that characteristic feline grace, confident and patient. I was going to die. After everything, after surviving being lost and injured, I was going to be killed by a mountain lion in the middle of nowhere. I couldn't run, couldn't climb a tree, couldn't defend myself effectively. I just stood there, leaning on my makeshift crutch, watching death approach. Then something else moved in the forest, something much larger than the mountain lion. I heard heavy footsteps, branches snapping, and a deep, resonant sound that was part growl, part roar, completely unlike anything I had ever heard. The mountain lion stopped immediately, its attention shifting from me to whatever was making that sound. A massive shape emerged from the dense trees behind the lion, and I felt my mind struggle to process what I was seeing. It was easily 8 feet tall, covered in dark brown hair, with a broad chest and impossibly long arms. The face was flat, almost human-like but distinctly different, with a pronounced brow ridge and a wide, powerful jaw. It walked upright on 2 legs with a strange, fluid gait. The creature, and I knew instantly what it was, even though every rational part of my brain insisted it was impossible, focused entirely on the mountain lion. It took several more steps forward, making that deep, threatening sound again, and the effect on the lion was immediate. The big cat flattened its ears, lowered its body, and backed away. The Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it, took another step forward and let out a sound that was part roar, part scream, so loud and primal that it seemed to shake the air itself. The mountain lion turned and ran, disappearing into the forest in seconds. I stood frozen in place, unable to move or think or even breathe properly. The Sasquatch slowly turned its massive head and looked directly at me. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only 30 seconds in reality, just staring at each other across maybe 20 feet of forest floor. Its eyes were dark and remarkably intelligent, distinctly primate-like in their depth and focus, but there was something in that gaze that suggested an awareness and understanding far beyond what I had ever seen in gorillas or chimpanzees at zoos. The creature wasn't threatening in its posture or demeanor. It wasn't aggressive or predatory. It just watched me with what seemed like curiosity or maybe concern, its massive chest rising and falling with slow, measured breaths. Then slowly and deliberately, moving with surprising gentleness for something so massive, the Sasquatch turned and began walking through the forest. It took several heavy steps, each footfall barely making a sound, despite its obvious weight, then stopped and looked back at me over its broad shoulder. It made a softer sound, almost like a low grunt or huff, not threatening but almost beckoning. Then it continued walking. It was clearly, unmistakably waiting for me to follow. Every rational instinct I possessed told me this was absolutely insane. This was a creature that wasn't supposed to exist according to modern science, something from Native American legends and campfire stories and grainy hoax videos, and I was seriously considering following it into the wilderness. But I was lost, badly injured, starving, and had just nearly been killed by a mountain lion. I had literally no other options left. If I stayed where I was, I would die within days. If this creature meant me harm, I would die quickly. If it was trying to help me somehow, then maybe, just maybe, I had a chance at survival. I began hobbling after the Sasquatch, using my makeshift stick to support my injured ankle, moving as fast as I could manage, which wasn't very fast at all. The creature maintained a slow, steady pace, its long strides covering ground efficiently without rushing. It periodically stopped to let me catch up, always keeping me in sight, always checking back to make sure I was still following and not in immediate distress. We traveled like this for what must have been hours, the Sasquatch leading me through the dense forest with obvious, intimate knowledge of the terrain. It chose paths that were relatively easier for me to navigate despite my injury, avoiding steep slopes and dense undergrowth when possible, picking routes through natural corridors between trees and around obstacles. Occasionally it would pause and look back, as if checking to make sure I was still managing, and I swear there was something almost like concern in those dark, intelligent eyes. As afternoon faded into evening and the light began to fail, I was completely exhausted and in severe, unrelenting pain. Every step sent jolts of agony through my ankle and up my leg. I couldn't go any farther. I stumbled to a stop, leaning heavily on my stick, and simply stood there, gasping for breath, my vision swimming. The Sasquatch stopped as well, turning to face me fully. It watched me for a long moment, its head tilted slightly as if assessing my condition. Then, to my absolute amazement, it began gathering branches and vegetation from the forest floor. I realized with a shock of comprehension that it was creating a makeshift shelter for me, pulling together fallen branches and pine boughs against a large boulder to form a basic windbreak and overhead cover. When it finished, the creature gestured with one massive hair-covered arm, almost like it was indicating I should rest there, that this space was for me. I didn't need to be told twice. I collapsed gratefully into the shelter, my body screaming with exhaustion and pain, grateful for even this minimal protection from the cold evening air. The Sasquatch moved away, maybe 20 or 25 yards, and settled itself against a large tree trunk where it had a clear view of me and the surrounding forest. It was standing guard, watching over me, protecting me from whatever dangers might emerge in the darkness. I fell asleep almost immediately from sheer exhaustion. The last thing I saw being that massive silhouette against the darkening trees. I must have fallen asleep from sheer exhaustion because I woke in the middle of the night to the sound of something moving in the darkness. I could see the vague outline of the Sasquatch still in its position against the tree, completely still and silent. Something else was out there, circling the area, and I heard that same deep, threatening sound from the Sasquatch, a warning to whatever was approaching. The other animal, probably the mountain lion again, or maybe a bear, moved away. The Sasquatch had protected me through the night. As dawn broke, I woke to find the Sasquatch still there, still watching. When it saw I was awake, it stood and began walking again, and I forced my aching body to follow. We traveled for several more hours, the Sasquatch leading me with patient determination. Then, in the late morning, I heard something that made my heart leap. Voices, human voices calling out, searching. The search and rescue team that Marcus had alerted was out looking for me. The Sasquatch heard the voices too. It stopped and turned to look at me one final time. I tried to speak, tried to say thank you, tried to express somehow what this creature had done for me. But no words came out. The Sasquatch just watched me for a few seconds with those intelligent, knowing eyes. Then it turned and walked back into the forest, moving quickly now, disappearing into the dense vegetation within moments. I shouted toward the voices, waving my arms, and soon 2 search and rescue personnel appeared through the trees. They were shocked to find me, surprised I was alive after being lost for 6 days. They radioed for a helicopter evacuation, gave me water and emergency food, wrapped me in a thermal blanket. They asked how I had survived, how I had made it this far from where I was supposed to be. I told them I had gotten lost, injured my ankle, and managed to navigate toward the direction where I thought the main trail would be. I didn't mention the mountain lion. I didn't mention the Sasquatch. How could I? They would think I was delirious or suffering from exposure-induced hallucinations. The helicopter arrived within an hour and flew me to a hospital where doctors treated my severely sprained ankle, dehydration, and mild hypothermia. I spent 2 days in the hospital recovering, answering questions from park rangers about what had happened. I gave them a version of events that was true in the basic facts, but excluded the impossible parts. I had gotten lost, injured myself, tried to self-rescue, but couldn't make it back. The search team found me. Simple as that. Everyone praised my survival skills and preparation. They said I was lucky. They had no idea how right they were. That was 5 years ago. I've never returned to that part of the Cascades, and I'm not sure I ever will. I think about the experience constantly, replaying every moment in my mind, trying to make sense of what happened. I still teach environmental science, still go hiking, but I'm different now. I'm more careful, more humble about what I think I know. I'm also more open to possibilities, more willing to admit that the world contains mysteries we don't fully understand. I've read everything I can find about Sasquatch sightings and encounters. Most reports describe the creatures as shy and elusive, avoiding human contact whenever possible. My experience fits that pattern. The Sasquatch could have simply watched the mountain lion kill me and walked away. No one would have known, but it chose to intervene. It chose to help me, guide me, protect me, and lead me to rescue. Why? I've asked myself that question thousands of times. Maybe the Sasquatch recognized me as another intelligent being in distress and felt compelled to help. Maybe there's some kind of ancient understanding among primates to assist each other during emergencies. Maybe the creature was simply acting according to its fundamental nature, whatever that nature might be. I don't have answers. All I know is that when I needed it most desperately, When I was certain I was going to die alone in the wilderness, a creature that science insists doesn't exist stepped out of the forest and saved my life. I've never told this story publicly before now. I've never tried to prove what happened or convince anyone else. I don't have photographs or physical evidence. I only have my memories and the certainty that comes from direct experience. I know Sasquatch exists because I met one. I interacted with one. I was rescued by one. That's not speculation or wishful thinking. That's reality. Sometimes I wonder if I should have tried to document the encounter, to lead researchers back to the area and help them search for evidence. But I've decided against it. These creatures have clearly gone to great lengths to avoid human contact for centuries. They've maintained their privacy and secrecy despite our technology and our determination to catalog every living thing. Who am I to violate that? The Sasquatch showed me mercy and kindness when it could have simply watched me die. The least I can do is respect its right to remain undiscovered and undisturbed. If science eventually proves Sasquatch existence through other means, that's fine. But I won't be the one to expose them. My encounter was a gift, not an opportunity for fame or attention. I've become more open-minded in my teaching. When students ask me whether undiscovered species might still exist, whether there could be large animals living in remote areas that we haven't documented yet, I no longer dismiss the possibility. I tell them the natural world is bigger and stranger than most people realize, that new species are discovered regularly, that vast wilderness areas remain relatively unexplored. I don't tell them about my encounter. They're young and still forming their understanding of science and critical thinking. I don't want to confuse them or make them question legitimate scientific methods, but I carry the knowledge with me every day. Somewhere in the mountains of the Pacific Northwest, somewhere in the deep forests where humans rarely venture, there lives a species of large, intelligent primate that has learned to coexist with humanity by remaining hidden. That's not fantasy, that's fact, whether mainstream science accepts it or not. The Sasquatch could have ignored me completely. It could have let nature take its course, but it chose compassion instead. It chose to intervene. And because of that choice, I'm alive today to share this story. I hope that wherever the Sasquatch is now, it understands how grateful I remain. I hope it knows that its kindness wasn't wasted or unappreciated. To anyone reading this who plans to venture into remote wilderness areas, please be careful. Respect the wildlife and the terrain. Bring proper equipment and inform others of your plans. Don't make the mistakes I made, but also keep an open mind about what might be possible. The world is larger and stranger than we typically acknowledge. There are beings living in the deep forests that we're only beginning to understand. And if you ever find yourself lost and afraid, and you detect something moving through the trees, don't automatically assume it's dangerous. Sometimes the most fearsome-looking creatures possess the kindest hearts. Sometimes the monsters turn out to be saviors. I learned that lesson firsthand, kneeling injured in the wilderness while a Sasquatch scared away a mountain lion and then led me to safety. That's my story. That's what happened to me in the Cascade Mountains 5 years ago. Believe it or reject it as you choose. I know the truth. And somewhere in those mountains, so does a Sasquatch. It knows it saved a lost hiker's life. It knows it showed mercy when it could have done nothing. And perhaps it's still out there, helping other people who become lost and frightened in the wilderness. I hope that's true, because the world needs more kindness like that, even from creatures we're not supposed to believe in, especially from creatures we're not supposed to believe in.